Hello, all you beautiful souls. Welcome to League Unlock. My name's Eric. Ahead of Easter weekend, it's only fitting that we bring Cottontail Timo to the forefront of this show. He's the co-host for this episode to celebrate Easter holiday and to celebrate the spring split being finished in Europe. We already went back and looked at the North America player rankings that we did in the preseason, revisited them, completely changed them after the spring split even happened. We're going to do the same thing in Europe, and this is including playoffs. So some of the performances that guys had in the postseason will heavily influence where they finished in the top 10 after the spring split. We're just going to go roll by roll, just like we did in NA, starting up in that top lane where I would say most of the rankings stayed somewhat similar. Obviously, you had some guys overachieving, and the theme for North America was 100 Thieves struggling. Well, it's Misfits in Europe who completely disappointed, I would say. You had Soaz there in that top three. He had some just terrible games this split. He had a few decent ones, but you remember that stretch where he went 0-15 or something over one weekend. So the theme for Europe is Misfits underperforming. And for someone like Finn, you see him, we had Profit originally. Finn only played 6 games to Profit's 12, but I think he looked better, and I think he is the future for this Rogue squad. So we have him in the post-spring rankings. And then expect, he's surprised. He had his G2 form for the majority of the split. I was impressed with his overall performance, but the biggest climb, obviously you got Cabochard, who, even though Vitality ended the split on a 6-game losing streak, I think Cabochard was clearly not at fault for the majority of these losses. He was the main win condition for Vitality in the majority of their wins, and really he just had a surprise season and was seriously being considered as an MVP award winner for the majority of the split, and maybe he would have finished a little bit closer to Caps if Vitality didn't have that dreadful end of the season run. But him and Mowgli were clearly the two best parts of Vitality this split. I think Jizuke had, kind of an off split by his standards that he set in 2018. But Cabochard, the only guy from the old Vitality roster still remaining when they didn't bring in all the Giants guys, he was the focal point for them on really through a couple of different meta shifts in the top lane. Early on, he was dominating on that Urgot pick. When that got completely nerfed and axed, the Jarvan and the Jace, he was an absolute animal on. And in the pick and ban, when Vitality locks in a Jarvan, even if it's early on in the draft, there's a good chance it's going up top to Cabochard as opposed to any of the junglers for Mowgli, because he's an absolute menace on that pick. Expect more carry performances out of Cabochard going forward because he really shined this split in this Vitality roster. Didn't shine enough to take down Wonder in that top spot. I think he's the all-pro guy in EU. I just feel like he kind of gets forgotten about on this G2 lineup, but we thought he would be the top dog coming into this split, and after Spring's behind us, I think you're still saying that after some of these performances he had against Fnatic in the regular season. His rise is better than most mid laners that we saw in this split. He can play carries, and we've seen him play the odd tank, but obviously this carry meta for him is really where he got the shine. He's the forgotten about carry. He can split push. He can be there for team fights. He can get solo advantages by himself in that laning phase, and he is one of the more underrated members on G2. Also, Bwipo, obviously Fnatic had that dreadful start to the split. Bwipo, he's just not consistent enough, I think, for us to put him in that top 3. That's why Alfari's ahead of him after the split. He'll have games where he's turning around these 1v3 ganks, or the term everyone loves, he does not like to lose his lane gracefully, and all of a sudden he's 0-4 before 15 minutes. So Bwipo, a little bit too much inconsistencies in the laning phase for him to finish in that top 3. But Alfari overall had a great split, and that's why he's in that 3rd spot for Origin. As we roll on to the junglers, it's kind of more of the same, where there's some underwhelming guys, but it's a G2 member who surprises and sits at the top. It's Jankos. He had I think for him, if you had just gone by regular season, he would definitely not be number one. But the playoff run, the 6-0 that G2 put up against Origin, I think was enough to put him in that top spot just because of how dominant he was. And Cold was actually looking like one of the best junglers in the LEC. And Jankos really had his way in that matchup. So I think he's deserving of that top spot when you include the playoff run that he had. Obviously, we had a few misses here. Mowgli was still solid, but not quite in that top 3 range. We have him in at number 6. Cold was a little bit better than we expected. Obviously, Maxlore, probably the biggest disappointment on this Misfits roster combined with Gorilla. But Maxlore obviously struggled mightily and was one of the weaker looking junglers in the LEC, which is why he's way, way, way down from that top 2 spot that we had originally projected him to finish at in the preseason. And obviously, by far, our biggest miss from the predictions in the preseason is Selfmade. We had him in at number 9 on that SK roster, and I mean, on paper, that SK roster did not look great. I think you still would say they overachieved to make playoffs, and a lot of that was because of Selfmade. We have him in at number 2, rookie of the split, all-pro jungler from spring, deservedly so. He was just absolutely incredible. Basically, 7 of SK's 9 wins, you could say he was the main carry MVP. He had the most player of the game awards, and deservedly so, because this guy's early game was absolutely disgusting. And even some of the top tier best junglers in Europe, he had his way with them in that matchup in the early game. And if not for, building an Infinity Edge in their last game of the split on that rec side, there's still a little bit of that L9 in him, that absolute Chad dominance that he, got to pro play from solo queue. But this guy, I don't know if we'll be seeing the exact same SK roster, but you definitely want to be building your future around this guy in the jungle role. He completely came on, surprised the scene, starting with that first Fnatic game where you were kind of like, okay, this guy's for real. Maybe SK will be better than bottom 3 than we thought, but he only expanded on that fantastic debut. I can't wait to see more out of him going forward, because I think he could be a top-tier jungler in Europe for many, many years to come. Also, real quick on Broxa, I think if Fnatic had gone deeper, I feel like we'd be talking about him maybe even higher up. If he got that head-to-head matchup against Jankos, maybe he could have gone and taken that spot from Jankos, because the last 4 weeks and even their first couple of playoff series, he was an absolute world champion level jungler here in EU. And just remember the long run that Fnatic would have had to go through. 4 best ofs if they wanted to win the LEC title, because they finished as that 3rd seed. I expect Broxa to stay in that top 3, maybe top 2, maybe even number 1 here for that summer split. He's still one of the best junglers in Europe, but he comes in at number 3, down from that top spot that we had based on his Worlds performance in 2018. And a quick shout out to Xerxes as well. He had an incredible split, and there were just too many good junglers for him to make that all-pro nod, but he was fantastic for Splice this split. There's a lot of damn good junglers in EU. Can't wait to see them hit the Rift again in the summer split. Coming up after the break, we know the mid lane talent pool in EU is among the best in all the regions, and with all these familiar faces, it was the rookie mids who stole the show. Welcome back, everybody, here to League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thanks for joining us as we look back at our preseason player rankings in Europe and give them some much needed updating after the entirety of the spring split. Yes, we are including playoff performances in these final rankings after the debut split and season of the LEC. We're moving on to those mid laners, and you remember there were 3 rookie mid laners that came in making their debut splits here, and obviously there was still plenty of talent pool left in that mid lane pool, even though Perks left. One of the best Western mid laners went to AD. There was still a stacked roster across the board. And the one consistent that we got from the preseason over to this one is Caps in at number 1. I think after Fnatic's run in 2018, he was clearly the best mid laner, and after spring, well, he won MVP, so it's hard to make a case against him staying in that top spot. And I think Nukeduck, you would still say, overall was the second best, even though the 0-6 performance against G2 that Origin had. I think overall, Nukeduck was still one of the most consistent mid laners, maybe even more consistent than Caps. Obviously, Caps just has a way higher ceiling, and we saw that in a plethora of games here in the spring split. So Caps definitely ahead of Nukeduck, but the consistencies and, you know, that 1v1, the Zed versus Cassio matchup where Nukeduck did take him down, he has that number 2 spot. Jizuke is a guy who I think overall had a disappointing split from what we expected from his debut year in 2018. The rookie of the split for that season, obviously what he did at Worlds against some of the best mid laners on the planet. We knew he always had issues with kind of getting caught out and being where he shouldn't be, but I think that surfaced even more so here in 2019. The synergy with him and Mowgli wasn't quite what you were expecting, wasn't quite to the level that he had even with Kikis or Gilius back in 2018. I expect a better run from him in summer, but we got him down a few spots down to that number 6 spot. But the real story were a lot of these rookies this year, and I think in the preseason we had Abadaga as the highest rated in that top 5 because of what he did in the Turkish league, and early on it looked like he might be finishing higher than that when Schalke jumped out to their 7-1 start. But after that there was so many issues, and one of the biggest ones was Abadaga getting caught out, going too far forward, going too ham, dying unnecessarily, which is why he plummets down to that number 8 spot. And overall, not a great run from him. I mean, still good for a rookie, but I think we were expecting a little bit more. Febivin is the highest rated Misfits guy, even though he had a rough run for the team. He was the best performing guy. That's why he's in at number 4. But the other 2 rookies, boy, they had a great run, a great season, starting with, of course, Nemesis, the man who replaced Caps in that mid lane. I think the first few weeks, much like everyone on Fnatic, you were disappointed, but specifically when playoffs came around, he really turned it on. Fnatic really allowed him to thrive in that environment and actually get to play some carry champions as opposed to Lissandra and Galio in losing matchups. He actually got some winning lanes. We got to see Kayle, we got to see Vayne, and man, this guy delivered on those champions. This is clearly the skill set and talent that Fnatic saw in him, and what you saw from him on the Mad Lions. I think he had a great debut split for him, and if not for Selfmade, you know, being an absolute 1v9 monster in a lot of SK Gaming's games, you would be talking about Nemesis as the rookie of the split. Overall, great split from him, and I think Fnatic should be happy with what they have in him going forward. This Fnatic roster should be the same for the summer split, and you know, if they avoid that 2-7, 3-7 start, they'll have a much better chance at finishing in one of those top 2 spots heading into summer. The other rookie mid laner that I think was criminally underrated at times was Humanoid. I think he performed even better than people would have expected coming into this split. We had him just behind Nemesis, and that's how he finishes here, but they both moved up a couple of spots to our preseason predictions. Humanoid's in at number 4, and he was a huge catalyst for Splyce. A lot of the comps that they were running was that dual carry threat with him and Kabe in the bottom lane, but some of the engages this guy did were absolutely phenomenal, and he was playing Azir when pretty much nobody else in the LEC was, and man, oh man, did he play that champion well. That is clearly a great pocket pick for him in pretty much any kind of meta, but he had a fantastic split for them, and he's a guy like Abadaga who does have some of that professional experience in the TCL, and he really showed up in a big way and was one of the main reasons why Splyce performed so well. Across the board, I think Splyce was a bit of a surprise. I think we knew they'd be fighting for and maybe even be one of these playoff contenders, but they were clearly a top 4 team for the majority of the split. So super impressive debut split from Humanoid. And overall, the three rookies definitely showed, even though for Schalke, Abadaga struggled a bit, they still all showcased that they deserve to be in the LEC. And Exile was the guy who was at the bottom of our list coming into this split. And once Special came in, he actually looked great. And I think for XL and Rogue heading into the summer split, they got some subs that are coming in. There's a good chance we're seeing Larson for Rogue, and Special should be starting. So I think both of those mid laners are only going to climb higher, and we're going to see more rookie talent in that mid lane. That's all EU does. They groom this rookie, young EU mid lane talent, and then they get shipped off to North America for that NA money. But now the LEC looks like they're doing things better than the LCS, so maybe the days of importing those mids over to North America is over, because franchising is here to stay in Europe, and they are definitely doing it right. Coming up after the break, the bottom lanes in EU. We love mages, we love AD carries, it doesn't matter, but there was definitely a changing of the guard at the top. Welcome back, it's League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thanks for hanging out as we look back on the spring split in Europe and count down the player rankings for each position. We've moved on to the bottom lane, everybody's favorite lane to camp. 3v2, 4v2, 5v5. Everyone's hanging out in the bot lane party. And Europe, you probably see mages most in the bottom lane out of all the regions, because you got someone like Perks, and apparently even Kabe is playing those mages in the bottom lane. But the preseason rankings were very difficult to mark where Perks would end up in his debut split as an AD carry. We originally had him just outside of that top 5 in that 6th spot, and I think it's safe to say he can climb a little bit higher than that. We've still got him just outside of that top 3, but if you look at the 5 guys that were all ahead of him, Attila obviously had the biggest fall down the standings, and I think overall he just had a very underwhelming split. I know everyone loves to show that highlight of the Vayne where he gets kidnapped by the Zac and then auto attacks 3 times and kills 2 people, but overall him and Jack Troll were just super underwhelming. They were getting caught out constantly and just losing 2v2s straight up. So he definitely down into that 8th spot. Perks is up to number 4. You still got 3 guys ahead of him in Kabe, Reckless, and Patrick. And I think that that's fair. I don't think it's hard still to gauge him, because, I mean, the guy played a whole series without actually playing the AD carry or marksman position. The one time he actually plays an AD carry, it's with a funnel comp. We're going back in time now, boys, to 2018. Obviously, overall, Perks was dominant in the bottom lane. He had so many different picks, and the value that he adds to the draft phase for G2 is unmatched by any of the 9 other players, any of the other 9 AD players in Europe. So that adds so much stock to him, and I think he'll only continue to rise. But right now, the performances of those top 3 ahead of him from the spring split, even though G2 kind of dismantled Origin 3 times in a row, I think overall Patrick was the main carry on Origin. He had a terrific split for them, and I think it's deserving of having him in that top 3, especially when he took down Reckless in a head-to-head series. That being said, Reckless is still, 1 spot ahead of him in that matchup. But those guys, I think, clearly in the top 3 from what we saw from them. And the top 3 preseason, Hansama and Upset. I think Upset still had a solid split. The only reason he's down a few spots is because of Schalke's struggles. I still think he's a top tier AD carry. Hansama, he was one of the actual big issues with this Misfits lineup. He was not the lane dominant force that we saw in 2018 nearly to the same level, and I thought that with the meta kind of shifting back for the most part to typical AD carries, traditional marksman, he would thrive, but him and Gorilla did not dominate that bottom lane like we were expecting coming into this split. Jeskla and Hikyu kind of swapped over those 9-10 spots, and Crown Shot was actually much better than I was expecting. He was right there with Selfmade helping carry SK Gaming. But the man who's the top dog, your all-pro AD carry, is Kabe on Splice. He was fully unleashed this split on the rest of the league, and man, he was thriving in that franchise role, that featured carry position that really just dominated throughout the entirety of the split. They got a little too cutesy in that Fnatic series with the Zoe and Vigar picks. I don't know if they were scared to go straight up 2v2 against Reckless and Hylissang or what exactly the thinking was there. But on these late game carries, there was a reason everyone was hyping up the Splyce late game post 35 minutes, and it was because 9 times out of 10, Kobbe was going to be on a character that could take over the game, whether it was Vayne, Xayah, Jinx, Tristana. It didn't matter. He would play the team fights perfectly, and he wasn't ever really in a bad position, flashing too deep or anything. He was just playing the team fights nearly perfectly, and that's why Splyce was one of the best teams. He was the best player on this squad, and really the development and growth that we've seen from him starting in 2018 when all his old Splyce guys left him. You really started to see signs of this where he could be and was being the featured carry. He got that pentakill in 2018 and really just some growth that I wasn't expecting. He was never featured like this on the original Splyce lineups, but he clearly has the talent to be able to carry a team, and we're starting to see that here in 2019, and I hope and expect to see more of it. But overall, I think he was the most consistent AD carry from the spring split, and that's why he's coming in at numero uno on our post-spring player rankings. And as we go to supports, coming into the split, of course, we talked about Hans Sama. That Misfits bot lane, that was supposed to be so hyped up. You're going against this team. They're going to be so good. They're going to completely dominate and take everything up. But they didn't. They didn't at all. Gorilla was in at number 1. We thought, come on, this guy is a LCK champion, one of the best supports of all time, not just in Europe, of all time, all the regions ever. He goes down to number 5. He was still fine. He was okay, but not nearly at the level that we were expecting out of someone of his caliber. And again, it's just Misfits pulling their best 100 Thieves impression. They didn't finish dead last, so kudos to them for that. But a stacked roster like they have, not making playoffs, obviously, pretty much every single one of their players is going to finish lower than we were expecting coming into this split. Mickey comes in as that top support. We had him number 3 in the preseason. I think he was huge in helping Perkz figure out how to play an entirely new role in a professional setting, because it's very different than solo queue. And the man said he's only been playing 2 scrim games per day heading into their entire playoff run, and you saw the level of performance that he was putting out with that much game time. Obviously, you're a massive talent to be able to do that. I hope he gets enough of a break and enough practice to play at MSI, because he is a huge focal point for G2 and in making sure that Perkz doesn't die too often and get caught out, because he did do that a few times. And obviously, the biggest change is Mithy. We had him in at number 9. We had NA Mithy, but we got EU Mithy in the spring split. He helped groom another AD carry to a top-tier performance with Patrick. They were a fantastic bottom lane, and Mithy, there were a few odd games where you saw glimpses of that TSM Mithy getting caught out, warding, completely separated from the entirety of his team and dying, but it was very few games that we saw that on this Origin roster. He was huge in taking down Fnatic. He got player of the series, deservedly so. This is much more the 2015 Origin Mithy or the G2 Mithy that we're seeing in Europe, and we knew he could get back to that level. Didn't think he would turn it around completely in one split, but that is exactly what he did. And just like that, that's it for League Unlocked today. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.